Hello and welcome. I'm Nozi Pumbanjwa and we're bringing you the highlights of ABSIP's 10th Financial Services Sector Conference that was held here in Johannesburg. The Association for Black Securities and Investment Professionals was founded in 1995. The aim was to address the lack of representation of black professionals in the industry. It quickly progressed into a forum where members could exchange information and ideas. After many years as a member, Trifosa Romano has been at the helm of the organization for the past 2 years. CNBC Africa's Arabile Gumede caught up with her at the conference.
What does ABSIP actually do and what does it aim to achieve?
ABSIP is an organization that is focusing on the nurturing and developing of young people in the financial services sector. Our vision is to be the custodian of black professional interest in the financial services sector and also the black businesses. So what we're trying to achieve is to make sure that we lead in the way on issues that has got to do with the financial services sector. Our motto is leading the way, and also just to make sure that black business who wants to be entrepreneurs and enter in the financial services sector, ABSIP can be a facilitator in terms of making sure that we have more of them coming into the fore, because of the financial services industry is not yet transformed to the level that we want it to be.
And talk to us then about challenges that you've sort of endured from the beginning right through to the stage.
The challenges have been in terms of putting the financial services sector code, whereby sometimes you have the members, because they work in traditional institutions, you find a person now sitting on the ABSIP. Sometimes you find yourself on the same table debating with your boss about the issues of transformation, what should be on the code and what shouldn't be on the code. Those has been the real challenges, but because ABSIP people have been nurtured to be mature and be able to separate the issues. When you're at work, it's a different issue. When you're at ABSIP, it's a different issue. So those are the things that we've experienced. And also sometimes now, because we have developed now, we're no longer just focusing on entrance. We're also focusing on building leaders who needs to be effective leaders. And we're not talking about effective leadership in South Africa. We're talking about effective leadership in the whole world, because we live in a global sort of village. So it becomes a challenge now, because certain members sometimes did not feel that they're still benefiting from ABSIP. But now we're starting to build that again to make sure that we develop a pipeline, but we don't develop it and leave it there. We nurture it and make it to make sure that it excels as a leader going forward.
Where to from here? Where does ABSIP go to?
Where we want to go into the continent. We want to have affiliates in the continent, whereby we can start now having dialogues and talking about how do we shape the financial services sector of the continent. Because for the continent to grow, we've seen many countries are growing, but the challenge is that there is no funding available in terms of accelerating that growth. The 8% growth that we are seeing in some countries could be 10 and 12% if the financial services sector was there. For example, you look at Rwanda, there is no, they've got only now established a coffee exchange. In Ethiopia, there is no stock exchange. It's only a commodities coffee stock exchange. So those are the things that we can start shaping the discussion as ABSIP. Tomorrow we'll end up having a Pan-African stock exchange, whereby it becomes an entry for anybody who wants to invest in Africa. It doesn't really matter whether it's in Sudan or it's in South Africa, but you still have one entry and where there is a lot of governance and you can go in and out as you please.
Leadership and governance in Africa have at times been a concern for potential investors. Despite these concerns, Africa's resilience and growth dynamic have been positive. This amid a global economic crisis. South Africa's Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan says higher levels of foreign direct investment are necessary, but we need to ask questions regarding the quality of capital coming into the continent.
Africa's growth story, unlike in previous episodes, has not been solely dependent on resource prices and demand. Now, an expansion of small and medium enterprises is generating economic diversification. According to World Bank data, SMEs contribute some 20% of the continent's GDP and approximately 50% contribution to the creation of new jobs in sub-Saharan Africa. In turn, these firms are giving rise to internationally competitive companies which are able to compete in global markets, create new business models, and new technologies. This could be the beginning of an important virtuous cycle. generating strong multiplier effects on the long-term productivity of capital and labor on the African continent. This has happened before in other economies, but now it is happening in countries such as Kenya, Mozambique, Ghana, and since our High Commissioner is here, Rwanda and elsewhere. The fact that African economies are breaking out of their resource dependence is not the only reason why Africa has shown such resilience in the face of the global economic crisis. Macroeconomic management has improved over the years. Compared to many developed countries, African economies have created remarkable macroeconomic stability over the past 10 to 15 years. There are many benefits to this. In the past few years, several African countries like Angola, Namibia, Zambia, Senegal, amongst many others, have issued external debt for the first time, which will enable them to invest in their future, but also develop capital markets. Coupled with the demographic advantages of increased urbanization, a youthful population, increasing connectivity, and a growing middle class, the conditions exist for a sustained growth trajectory if we manage the situation correctly.
Leadership is an item at the top of the UPSIP agenda.
I believe that the leadership that we see today has got the right vision. They know what needs to be done. However, it's in the application, in the implementation, and there are a number of issues that make that problem. One of them is around skills. Another one, institutional structures that need serious strengthening in order to deepen democracy, whether they are institutions of political ones or economic ones. Issues around governance that need to be addressed. So we do, however, have a number of challenges, but I believe that, to use the financial lingo, the trend is more positive than on the negative.
It's a time of opportunities, many, and challenges, of course. We can reap fruits from the opportunities if we understand better our challenges and if we demonstrate determination and put in place systems to properly handle the kind of challenges that we are facing so as to remain well focused to the vision of rising better, faster, and in a sustainable way.
I think if one is reflective, one would say leadership is under pressure. And by pressure, I mean, there is this huge expectation that needs to be lived up to. And we've done very well. The African Rising narrative has been a great one, but the truth is we have 10 million new young people entering the labor force every year. The nature of the strong growth we've seen in recent years hasn't always translated to enough employment. So if you look at the youth bulge, if you look at the demographics, what is expected in the next 10 to 20 years, the huge numbers of people we're going to be seeing in the continent, I think leadership is under pressure to start living up to expectations and then to start dealing with these huge developments.
But how do we take that message then to the youth? And actually, because you've just said, so many people that are sort of coming up into the working sector, how do we actually take this message of continued leadership and sustained ethical leadership, if you want to call it that even, to the youth and make sure that this sort of continues and is sustained?
Well, I'm a finance person, so I tend to see the solution as linked to investment. I think if you look at the investment levels on the continent today, they're much higher than they've ever been. This is part of the African Rising narrative. But the actual average investment levels are around 22% of GDP. If you go to Latin America, it's about 32% of GDP. You go to developing Asia, it's in the 40s. So my view is, yes, we've done very well. I think there's been some windfalls as well, but there is a huge pent-up demand that needs to be dealt with in terms of backlogs of infrastructure, of housing.
Is the current leadership going to be able to attract investment? You see, That is a misnomer, I think, because I think we should look to ourselves, to invest in ourselves. We must understand capital flows from Africa, capital flows to Africa, but more importantly, capital flows from Africa, and how we can better mobilize our own savings to improve the continent and not look to other people.
Does that not move to exactly what Triforce actually said earlier in her speech and about perhaps a pan-African stock exchange type thing, where those inflows or communication barriers would potentially be broken down?
I think increasingly as Africans we have to look at that. We have to look at mobilizing our own savings, and they are huge. The savings of Africans are huge, but they leave the continent and are replaced by aid from other people. And our discussions are usually about how can we get them to invest here rather than how can we invest here. Rwanda is a great example of self-determination, of organization, because what the president introduced a couple of years ago, President Kagame, is that on Saturdays, people just come and clean the city. And that doesn't require foreign direct investment. No. So, and they do. I mean, it is volunteerism.
How does Rwanda move forward?
We are, like everybody, focusing on change, shifting from colonialism mindset towards self-determination. We have written visions, we have policies and strategies and institutions, but probably we put a lot of emphasis in walking the talk. Many countries or many companies have very bold vision, well written, and strategies and plans, but they easily tend to say we could not achieve our plans this year, we will do it next year. Tomorrow is another day. In Rwanda, we have self-disciplined ourselves that tomorrow is not the day to do things of today. So discipline, monitoring and evaluation, making the institutions that you put into place to work, and being open enough. Where you don't have the skills, don't try to do mistakes. Borrow from those who have got the skills. So ease immigration for the skills you need, respect the investors, but also tie them to performance. That's how we have been achieving steady growth of average 8% for the last more than 10 years. We are really seeing poverty reduction in a country that was extremely poor to the level that you cannot imagine.
When the minister talks about transformational leadership, essentially this issue has to start to manifest in terms of structural transformation of our economies. What do we mean by that? I think those who understand the debates around how an economy begins to move up the ladder of productivity so you can have higher standards of income for your people, you have to move out of the general commodity space. It's very good to have commodities, but you have to add value. And that's where you need transformational leadership. 2/3 of the African population is still involved in very basic agriculture. And I remember 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, these annual reports that come out of the World Bank and elsewhere, they always highlight one or two issues. They'll say you have to get the prices right, or you have to get the institutions right. The truth is, it's complex. Success is determined by a good 10 to 15 factors. If you look at the competitiveness reports on Africa, they'll always size up the continent on about 12 factors. And we get caught up on one or two, and we think we're doing well just because we've done one or two well. The thing is, you have to do a lot of things well to succeed, and to succeed sustainably.
How far do you think we've come in terms of social inclusion, though? Taking the needs of the society and really saying to them, well, I may be leading, but I need to ensure that, you won't serve everybody 100%. But how far do you think we've come in serving as at most as possible?
Each and every organization has to think of new ways of doing business. That includes other communities, that bring in the communities, and you find there are companies that are doing it very well. They are perfecting it. Like, for instance, should I mention? Maybe not. Okay, yes, there are some companies that are really mastering it very well, whereby they've identified that if you want products in your shop, how do you then use, small farmers in order to supply you collectively? So what that means is that you need to invest in the training of those people, invest in the education, and therefore create that inclusive growth that we want. So I believe that the next single important thing for us to do in the African continent is to actually see how business contribute to inclusive growth.
When we come back from the break, we look at the continent's potential as a new economic frontier. Stay with us.